to Simpler. We are three pastors, husbands, and fathers on a journey to make life simpler by holding Jesus as the core for every belief and practice. This journey has shaped us to be more like Christ, freed us from the shame of failure, and encouraged us to a deeper love of our Lord and God. We invite you to join us in the discussions that have shaped and continue to shape our lives.
Robert was telling me a really good core workout. Oh man, I've got to try it. I haven't tried it yet, but it's a plank jumping jack. So you're in a push-up position, and then you're doing the jumping jacks with your feet.
Okay, yeah.
And so really exercises all the core, but also your legs, your hip flexors, and all that. And so I'm gonna try that.
Stacy was telling me, he's like, dude, if you just want to strengthen your core, why don't you get one of those electronic dills that just like
shakes it?
I'm not opposed to that. It's not a bad idea.
It's funny.
I mean, I feel like if Stacy's arms were bigger, I'd take more advice from him.
It's hard to listen to him, you know?
It's so hard.
Golly. Somebody asked him the other day, I think it was Wednesday night Bible study or something. They're like, why does Micah always give you a hard time like that? And he was like, he just does. And he was like, because that's just Micah. That's just how Micah is. And he goes, but make no mistake. He goes, I'm happy to give him a hard time too.
That's what's fun.
Yeah.
That's what's fun.
I took, at the movie theater, they have summer movie clubhouse for kids, like $1 to go see movies. So me and Riley went to go see not Despicable Me, but it was the Minion one, the prequel or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And in it, there was some part where he was like, I can take him. He's got such tiny little arms or something like that. And I was like, it's about Stacy, right?
Stacy was telling me on a serious note that he sent me some kettlebell workouts, like for core that look awesome. And as much as like, I can't have a kettlebell with me everywhere, it would be kind of cool, I think, to do that. So we'll see. I might do it.
Yeah. Thomas Padilla would love that. That dude loved kettlebell workouts.
Kettlebell.
Well,
hey, everybody, let's go to the PCC.
Let's do it.
Let's go on over.
All we do is make fun of the way Ryan says things here on the podcast.
So
it's easy to do.
This was announced a few weeks ago, but I haven't talked about it, so I'm going to. The Apple Vision Pro. Gosh, dude, it looks so freaking cool. Like, and I was rewatching stuff kind of in preparation for talking about it today. And golly, there's so much technology in that thing. It was like, I forget all the numbers, but it's like 6 cameras, 5 sensors, maybe 4 cameras, 5 sensors, and then 6 microphones kind of all the way around it. And then they engineered all of the hardware side of it. And then the software side of it, they had to engineer a chip that processes things so fast that it's as if it's in real time, which is insane. Like if you're not actually seeing, or for those of you who are listening who don't know what the Apple Vision Pro is, Apple released basically an augmented reality goggle that you can wear. And
it's not available yet.
It's not available yet, but it'll be available.
They've announced it.
As of right now, it should be available in the beginning of 2024, early 2024. And so much of their push for it is putting an operating system in the space that you're in. And so if I were to put on this goggle set, I would see apps directly in front of me, and you don't have to make sure that your hand is in the range of what you can see in the field of vision. It follows where your eyes move, which is insane. So like I look at an app, and then I don't have to have the cameras on the goggle can see where my hand is, and I just tap my hand to click on certain things, that's unlike that in itself is insane. Like that's so crazy. Just the amount of like little bitty things. Like they were. I was watching the video last night, and they were talking about the studies they watched about pupil movement, how microscopic it is, just so minimal. But what they could do is it was like, I forget the exact numbers, but almost every time, based off of those tiny movements, they could know exactly where a person's focusing based off these little things. And then I did see a guy who actually I can't imagine wearing these things, but he put on what looked like Nerf darts on his eyeballs, and then showed like if you pan something across the room, it's really easy to follow your eyes. He said, but if I'm just looking in a normal everyday life, like the darts were so twitchy, it was like just all over the place. And so he
stuck them to his eyeballs.
Dude, so it must have been something specifically for eyes, but it looked like I'll find the video and show you. It looked like Nerf darts that he was.
I'm uncomfortable. Like I want to blink right now. Like
just thinking about having
like a contact that has something on it.
That's what I assume. So it's like a much thinner. Nerf dart. Yeah.
You can.
I kind of hope it's just Nerf darts, and he's
just like, all right, guys, look at this. He licks it, sticks it on. So one of the videos too that I watched in preparation for this was talking about just all of the implications for it. First, personally, in regards to technology and in regards to entertainment, even I'm just so excited.
The entertainment part looks amazing,
man.
That's what's hard for me though. Is like $3,500, right?
Dude, so much money. Yeah.
So if it could do everything my MacBook Pro could do, I would probably actually be okay with getting it. If it's just an iPad.
Yeah. It's hard. It's hard to justify.
Cool entertainment, right?
I mean, it's potentially. I mean, we won't really know until people start using it. But based off of what they talk about the tech doing, the operating system can limit it to, because technically our iPads can do everything a MacBook Pro can do hardware wise, but the operating system limits it to not do certain things, to not run certain software. Because that
it has enough hardware.
Yeah, that iPad has the same M2 chip that my MacBook Pro has. So it could run all of the exact same software that my MacBook Pro does, but it doesn't allow it to transfer. And
so there must be some
there must be reasoning for
something else in that, because like as an example, when I run the same software for tracks for worship from my iPad and from my Mac, it never glitches on my Mac, and it almost always glitches on my iPad.
And it could have to do with airflow and some things like that. So, like for instance, but the 13-inch MacBook Pros, I don't think have any fans or anything in it. Oh, he actually did put one on.
Those are Nerf darts.
He did do Nerf darts.
Those are Nerf darts.
That's not the video I saw, but he actually did do Nerf darts. That's great.
That's so stupid. It looks amazing.
So that's why I say in theory. I don't know the ins and outs of it. Just thinking about just putting it on and looking around.
The other thing about the Vision Pro, right? They were talking about how the iPhone is so crystal clear, but for every 1 pixel in the iPhone, it's 64 in the Vision
insane,
Pro.
Man. Yeah. It's like having two greater than 4K resolution screens on either eye.
Yeah. I want to watch a movie like they talked about, where you can just be like in the movie, like you're just surrounded
blacks
by
out
the movie.
Everything. You can make 100-foot screen, dude.
You could like literally be in the movie. Like the idea of augmented reality is that it can, you can be in it.
The technology implications.
I wet myself the first time. Like you watch like Gladiator or something like that.
You're just in the movie.
Braveheart. You're like,
dude. So like those types of things that we're on the precipice of pushing towards, I'm so excited for. Obviously, there are tons of social implications and things like that. But I think just like we can go through every big technological advancement and see that how society was hit hard, had to figure out how to adapt and then adapt it. So think about smartphones. One of my favorite example ever, which I've said on the podcast before, was cars, and how as cars began to get more popularized, people saw that deaths in streets were skyrocketing because people weren't used to looking both ways before they crossed the street. They were like, "Oh, there's Jimmy's house," and they just start walking and just get flattened out because they've never had to look both ways to go to. There you go. Just had to. They never had to look both ways to go to Jimmy's house. And so same thing with these goggles. It's gonna be goofy for a while. Thinking about like walking into your dad's office and he's got this big old headset on. But the more that we're in, it's the same thing with.
But the thing about it, right, is that you didn't mention is that he can see through the goggles into the room still, and then it creates a map of your face.
Which is the only one to do that currently.
Yeah, so that the person looking at you can still see your eyes, essentially.
Which is it's great. Do what?
Go ahead.
I was gonna say it's great that Apple is aware of, okay, how can we make this more, how can we create something that's in itself not tangible? We're creating a digital environment, but make it tangible and still fit into the realm of what humans would deem as normal or as normal social interaction.
You can still see if somebody walks into the room or whatever.
I'm not seeing your real eyes, but I'm seeing a projection of your eyes or a created image of yours. I still feel like I'm talking to you. Right. I'm not having to wait until you take the mask off. I can still have a conversation with you with the mask on.
Right. The like, when you talk to like Zoom or FaceTime or something, where it takes like a AI rendering of you, where that person on the other side can see the AI rendering. Like that's okay. First of all, I feel right now like it's similar to General what's his face on that Star Wars where they like did a CGI version. You were like, that was amazing. I was like, that was so stupid. Like it's cool for the technology, doesn't work for the situation. I know they will get that later.
They'll get there. Yeah.
My hope is now is that you can adjust that AI generated person of yourself. Like I want to get one and then have the AI generated person of myself just completely jacked.
Yeah, and I was watching the video again last night, and they were like, and it creates a perfect rendering of you. And the guy talking like he never once separated his teeth from his lips, so he's like, "Hey guys, how you doing today?" Like I was like, that doesn't look that there yet, but I get where you're coming from.
That doesn't look perfect.
Exactly. Yeah.
Except for what you don't know is that guy actually looks like that. That's how he talks.
So I'm sorry I threw you under the bus, buddy.
Dude, why are there Nerf darts stuck on your eyeballs?
I know what's going on, man. Anyway, I'm excited about it.
It is cool. It is super cool. I like. I'm not even joking. If it could do everything my MacBook Pro can do, I would get one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same
Why
price.
Not?
Yeah.
It's a little.
I didn't
more
say everything I wanted to say,
but like it's not maybe much more expensive than your MacBook Pro.
Yeah, I think mine was around $3,300. It's about the same. Yeah,
man, mine's not that upgraded, but
It's
with
gonna be
with
cool.
the extra stuff that comes with it, like you could almost justify getting it if it could replace your.
If we could do everything in
laptop,
MacBook do,
yeah.
and plus more, absolutely. We're not talking about that the whole time, even though I'd like to. Ryan, what are we actually talking about today?
Today we are talking about grief and loss. I was asked if we could discuss that on the podcast and how, I mean, that's really all they said, but basically how do we deal with the grief as believers? How do we deal with grief and loss of a loved one?
Good, Ryan. Shouldn't people just get over it? I feel so bad asking that question. Because you made it personally. Like somebody asked us if we could talk about this.
Yeah. I know. Now she's really mad at you.
No, she just turns it off.
Well, actually, Pierce, I think that probably, I mean, honestly, like there are probably people who say that kind of garbage. Like, well, just get over it. Like, shouldn't you be over it by now? And then there are people like me who, I mean, if we're just being honest, I don't miss my dad. I did not experience grief or loss with my dad. It didn't faze me. I've had friends, really close friends who have died of cancer and things like that. So I've experienced grief and loss in those respects. I remember my mom, after my sister Jessie was born, like a year and a half after Jessie was born, my mom was pregnant again and had a miscarriage between Jessie and Lisa, my two youngest sisters. And that devastated me because I had really enjoyed, I'm 12 years older than Jessie, and I really enjoyed being like the big brother and playing with her all the time. And so I was excited to do that again. And so I think when we think about grief and loss, there's a lot to take into account. I think we need to talk about just the reality that there is grief. There is a sense of loss that when we've invested in someone or had someone invest in us, there's a sorrow, there's a void there. I think we need to talk about the way that looks if they're a believer versus if they're not a believer. I think that shapes our grief. If they're a believer, there's a little bit of peace that comes with that, even in the midst of our sorrow. And I think that some Christians wrongly, like Paul says we don't want to mourn as those who have no hope in 1 Thessalonians 4, talking about the hope of the resurrection. I think that some Christians believe that because we have hope in eternity and we have hope in the resurrected life, that we shouldn't have grief. And I don't think that those two are mutually exclusive. Like,
that's a weird.
Yeah, it's
almost
weird
like
approach.
that. I was thinking about when you said get over it. Like,
Wow,
I think that, wow, Pierce. What's funny is I think there's kind of two sides of that thought. One would be if there is the person who's a believer, I'm just going to put it in this camp, a believer whose hope rests in Jesus, whose hope rests in the resurrection, whose hope rests in eternity, but because of grief is just completely like flattened in life, like where they don't function at all. There is a part of that where you need to say, get over it. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I think that the confusion is it's not get over grief. It's that I don't think that's grief. I think it is grief that you are allowing to bring yourself to a place where you are basically not putting your hope in Jesus anymore.
Yeah. I was going to, I probably wouldn't say get over it. I would probably say that like, it seems that your hope isn't in Christ right now.
I would probably say you need to get over yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
Because that's probably the reason that you've let it go that far. And I'm not talking about like a couple weeks after tragedy like, I'm talking about people who like just mope for the rest of their life.
Or the person who in 5 years or 10 years is going to have a monumental life event where they would have loved their spouse or their kid or whatever to have been there. And it just stabs at your heart all over again.
Right? I was going to say
different.
The flip side of that is that, so my grief is drastically different than y'all's probably in terms of losing my mom because of my relationship with my mom.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I probably feel stronger grief than you guys do about your dads. I'm guessing for sure with you. You're probably the in between. Because you had a good relationship with your dad. It was just awkward.
Well, he still. I mean, there was still like he left. There was still just the heartache. There was those things, but we were still friends. If that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. So I
there
think
was still some loss
there.
There,
so like, but my grief.
There is no way you don't have more grief than me.
Right.
Like I mean, I'm at zero.
I'm just So like what's funny right now, as like you say this, like I still feel the grief. Like I still feel the weight of my mom's death. I still feel the weight of her
8 years
not being here. Yeah, and so it's been a long time. So and I'm probably the most like emotionally stable person that most people know. Like I'm not shaken by really much in life,
sure,
at all. so like I'm saying I still feel the experience of grief right now. I feel the emotion of like pain, if you want to call it. Like I feel like grief actually creates pain. So like I'm saying I still feel that now. Maybe the distinction is in the get over it thought is like there's never been a point, even from the day of my mom's death, even from like the suffering that happened right before her death of her being sick, where it shifted my life, where I was like, forget Jesus, even for a moment. You know what I mean? My hope
your
didn't
mom,
change.
as she was dying, her focus was 100% on Jesus.
And maybe that helps. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like to the point, I think sometimes when we talk to people about, when we counsel people through grief, I almost think sometimes people are waiting for it to go away.
Yeah.
And all I'm saying is I don't know if it does. Maybe it like tapers off some, where like you don't experience it as much.
It's different.
You know what I mean? Like when my mom died up front, like I thought about it every day, every moment of every day. And there's a point when like it's not something you think about constantly, but there is a constant reminder at times in life where where it's brought back, or like you said a second ago, then maybe an event happens where you're like, oh, this brings back memories. Or
your son's graduation in a year, there will be a part of you that thinks, man, my mom would have loved this. Or like
nonstop. And I know like my dad feels way more grief than I do. So like when we're doing those kind of things where my mom used to do it with us, I can see it on his face. Like he feels, after 8 years, he still feels that intense grief. So I think maybe to start the conversation this way, I think maybe the wrong perspective of dealing with grief is trying to make it go away.
So, well, I'd like to progress through it this way. Like, let's first of all talk about just the reality of grief. Yeah. It's a reality. And for someone to have this idea, which none of us do, but for someone to have the idea that because you're a Christian, you don't have grief, that's just stupid. And so at the very least, like some people say that Jesus wept because he was sad in John 11, because he was sad over Lazarus's death. I struggle with that reading of that text, simply because he's on his way to raise him from the dead. He knows very well that he's about to raise him from the dead. Yeah. But we do see Jesus weep, and we do see Jesus have compassion for the crowds, and we do see Jesus grieve over the crowds because they're like sheep without a shepherd. Like there is a grief that even Christ has for the loss of. So like grief as an entity, as an emotion, as a state is not.
I think it is just an emotion.
Yeah, it's not contrary to Jesus to have grief.
I just to clarify, I don't think it's a state. Okay. I don't think.
Yeah, it's an emotion.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe you're in a phase of like where you're experiencing the emotion of grief more often, but I would struggle with saying like this is the state I'm in.
Yeah.
It's an emotion.
Yeah, and it's vivid. It's powerful.
Yeah.
And so there's I think for me, if I felt grief for my dad, it was like the first 3 days after my dad died. And the only grief that I experienced was twofold. One, threefold. One, I don't believe he ever put his faith in Christ. That grieved me. Two, I was never going to have a dad who cared about me. As long as he was still alive, there was the chance that maybe one day he would actually care about me and my family. But now that he's dead, that's gone. And then three, I relived in the space of 3 days preparing for his cremation and all that stuff, and just thinking about him a lot. I relived every crappy memory I ever had, and that sucked a lot. And so all the really crappy things he did, and so that was real grief that I felt. I don't continue to feel any of that, because whether he did put faith in Christ in the last moment or did not, that's done. He's never going to be a father to me, but he wasn't really anyway. And so I haven't really lost anything except for the hope that maybe one day I would have that. And then the third thing was like, I haven't reflected on all the crappy things he's done really since then. You know what I mean? So like, but let's say, a loss of a parent, a loss of a spouse, a loss of a child, like these are your three probably closest people that you're going to lose in life. That's just going to decimate you, right? It's going to decimate you. And so one of the things that I want to be really clear on is like, I think if I lost Michelle and the boys, I would probably not want to live in my home for a while because everything there, it would just be too painful for me. I'd come sleep on one of you guys' couches, probably Micah's, because you have a little baby waking up in the middle of the night, Pierce. So
you got a guest room on the other side. You'll be fine.
Okay. Yeah, fine. Yeah. I'll come sleep in your guest room. But like it would take my breath away.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I don't know. I mean, I cannot imagine a scenario where I would ever quit missing them.
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
Like,
I think it's why I was like maybe moving that way is because I think when in the conversations I have with people about grief, there's almost this sense of they want it to go away.
Yeah.
And I don't, for one, I don't think that's a reality.
No.
And two, I think that sometimes we can be a catalyst for grief by the way we handle life. So, for example, before my mom died, this is like the week before she died, we were in the hospital, and she hadn't talked for days, and we did some worship in the hospital room, and she like lifted her head and sang, which was such a cool thing. But like, there were people who were shocked that we like, because we were laughing that day and we were joking and we were still us, and they were like, how can you guys do this? Your mom's on her deathbed. Because I think that we can be a catalyst for our own grief. Like, I think grief is a reality, but I think we can make it a worse emotion, maybe a more intense emotion is a better way to say it, by how we handle it. So I think it's what Paul says, we don't grieve as those who have no hope. He's acknowledging that there's grief, but if the hope is in Jesus, then we're not grieving in the same way that people do who have no hope.
Well, the other thing too, you said that y'all were laughing and talking and stuff like that. I feel a little bit like, and this is probably one of the many differences between my dad and your mom passing, is that you're able to laugh because you've shared some really great times together, and you're able to reflect on these moments and these stories. And do you remember when we did this, Mom? Or do you remember when Mom was doing? You're able to have these conversations, and so it's not that grief is the only thing you feel about your mom. Yeah. It's that there are these other beautiful things you feel about your mom too.
Yeah,
I don't have any beautiful things that I feel about my dad. None. Like zero.
Do you feel like then? I wonder if there's. Okay, in a positive way, here's a thought, brand new thought. I wonder if there's a positive grief that is associated with the good things. Yeah. Like, in other words, I miss my mom. You don't miss your dad.
No, not at all.
So that's what I mean is like, I wonder if there's an aspect of me missing my mom that brings up some feeling of grief. Yeah. That is because I had this good relationship with her and because she was an amazing mom.
Sure. Yeah, but it also allows you, I mean, I don't know, your mom cooked a lot. And I don't know if you had like a thing that your mom cooked that, was like your thing or whatever.
Anything
but
sweet.
Yeah, but like there are things like those that you can kind of be like, so when my dad's mom died, I was 12 and I loved my grandmother. And she was this kind of short, round, roly-poly lady.
She was big boned.
She was. And she cooked. I mean, man, she cooked. And I remember anytime we would drive into Baker City, Oregon, we'd go up every summer for a visit, and the outside door went into this really long hallway that was essentially like a very long mud room. And there was an ice box in it. That's what my grandfather called the refrigerator. And I loved it because I remember being a little kid and he goes, go get a pop out of the ice box. And I had no clue what he meant. And it was like, my mom was like, get a popsicle out of the refrigerator. I was like, oh, okay.
Oh, that's what he meant? A pop? He didn't mean a soda?
So he meant a soda. Yeah, sorry. I was thinking popsicle.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway. So I would walk in and you'd go in from that hallway into the kitchen. And my grandmother was standing there always. Every time we'd roll into town, she was standing there baking cookies or something in her little roly-poly way. And she would come and she'd hug you. And she was just, I mean, like, I just have these memories of her. And man, I loved her. Like when she died, it tore me up.
Yeah.
Like it crushed me. And I still have a couple of her things. In fact, I have my grandfather's World War II medals and his compass and his bayonet, and I have him in a shadow box. And I have a silk scarf that when my grandmother died, I have no idea as a 12-year-old why I wanted it, but it was an American flag silk scarf that she had that smelled like her. And I took it, and now it's in that shadow box with my grandfather's World War II stuff. And that stuff has a lot of value to me just because of the memories I had with my grandparents. Yeah. And so I really grieved my grandmother, but I think our grief takes a different shape depending on whether or not the person knew Jesus. And so if the person doesn't know Jesus, that grief, I think, kind of has a deeper, hollow feel to it. Yeah. Or if we're not sure if they knew Jesus, if we're sure that they knew Jesus, the grief is tempered because we know that. And the very first death that I remember facing, and I've mentioned this guy before, was a friend of mine in 7th grade named Joey, who died of cancer. And we became friends, and I can't remember if it was summer before or summer after 7th grade, but we became friends at church camp, and he had recently gone into remission. He was finally healthy enough. His parents let him go to church camp. He was off chemo by this point and stuff, but you could see the effects of it still. His hair was real thin. His face was really swollen and stuff. His hands were really swollen from all the chemo and different things. And we became good friends. And a few months later, the chemo came back and he ended up dying. But I would go up to the hospital 2 or 3 days a week after school, and my mom would drop me off there for a couple of hours to hang out with him. And I remember watching him die. Mm-hmm. But Joey knew Jesus. Like, there was something for 12-year-old Ryan, 13-year-old Ryan, that how I grieved the loss of my friend Joey was shaped by the fact that I knew he knew Christ.
It's one of the things that Drew Curtis used to tell me, is that our emotions are actually shaped by the way we think. And so I think there's an aspect of dealing with grief, if you want to call it that, where I think how we think about the person or the situation can help us work through that grief.
Yeah, sure.
And so I think that's maybe a help for people, is like so as an example, like if you feel like, I'll give a personal example, like when sometimes I'll feel these moments where I'm like, I miss my mom. My mom used to just like pop in sometimes when my kids were real little. She'd just like show up at the house, she's running errands, and she'd just lay on the couch and talk, hang out for a while. There are times where I like expect my mom to just walk in the door. Yeah. And it's, for whatever reason, when that pops in my head, there's a moment of like, man, I really miss my mom.
Yeah.
But then it's, maybe your point, Ryan, is tempered by the memory of the joy of the experience. So Absolutely. It's like, while it maybe is a catalyst sometimes for missing her, for the grief, it's how I think about my mom that almost puts I don't even know how to call it, like the bad feelings of grief at bay to some degree. Yeah. Even though I still feel it, it's the way that I think about it. Like, I think a lot of people try to deal with grief by like medicating, if you will, quote unquote, or like doing something else to try to make them not think about it anymore, versus, and maybe in some situations that's a reality. Like maybe if you still felt like some really awkward grief about your dad because of the bad relationship, maybe it makes sense for you to like, when those memories pop up, to do something else, to like to think about something different. But if it's someone that you had a good relationship, I think this would go for whether they're believers or non-believers. Yeah. If you're thinking about it from a positive perspective about the relationship, it's going to temper that grief. Yeah. Now, some people might struggle, like, why would you think about that with a non-believer? Because your grief doesn't affect their eternity.
No, it does not.
So we're just talking about dealing with your grief, right? And so, like, if it's you wanting to like work through your grief, I think it's how you think about the person, how you think about the situation that allows you to work through that.
Yeah. I think to your point, thinking correctly. Mm-hmm. It matters. It does matter as a believer what we believe about eternity, what we believe about God, what we believe about salvation, because, like my buddy Terry from Longview, he died of cancer. Golly, man, it's been 12 years ago probably now. I don't know if it's been quite that long. It's been a long time, and as he was dying, so the cancer ended up in his lymph nodes, his throat, his brain, his heart, like it just ate him up. And he couldn't speak towards the end of his life because the cancer had basically closed off his throat. And so he sent out emails and texts to a lot of pastor friends, including me, and just said, like, I didn't do anything at his funeral, but he said, check in on my wife and my daughter from time to time and whatever. But the pastors that were going to do his funeral, the 4 guys he asked to do his funeral, he said, be sure you proclaim Jesus. Be sure that you proclaim who Christ is. And he said, because he goes, I'll be with him. He was like, don't pity me. Yeah. And I think sometimes our grief, I think we grieve for the person who's gone and we say, man, their life was cut way too short,
or
we grieve what they could have been. But if they knew Jesus,
it's a small perspective.
They are in such a better place now than like. Why wouldn't we, like, I get it from an emotional connectivity kind of point, why we wouldn't want them to be with Jesus, because we want them.
Yeah.
But the reality is they're gone.
Yeah.
And they're with Christ. Now, can we rejoice that they're with Christ, but also grieve the loss that we're experiencing? 100%.
Yeah.
But let's talk about more, Micah and Pierce. Jump in on this too. I'm interested in your grief experience with your dad, Pierce. But how do we allow our affection, the person who stayed behind, how do we allow our affection for Christ? Because we said this at the very beginning, that one of the things that we can't do is allow the grief we have in this loss to be the thing that shapes our day-to-day view of the world. Christ still has to be what shapes our day-to-day view. So how do we balance that? How do we go about doing that? And I'm also interested in your.
I still think that's like a perspective, like a mindset.
Yeah.
It's how you think.
Well, some people think correctly and some people not. So how do we shape how we think?
Well, I mean, I think if you want a simple answer, like if someone's struggling, like, man, I just can't think differently about this. Honestly, I think the thing you do is like you overwhelm yourself with the word,
okay,
with the scriptures, because I think there's something about that. Like it shapes you in a different way than anything else.
Sure.
I mean, you could do distractions, but I think if you're talking about like moving
healthy,
actual growth, that's one of the things you can do. I think you could have put yourself like in a situation where you're either it's like hanging out or breakfast, lunch, whatever it is, with someone where you're just talking about spiritual things like growth. So I think it's a mindset. I think about it in terms of like how Paul, this is a little different than Romans 12:2. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. This is like the contrast to a mindset of like obedience to the law, like be transformed by the way you think differently. Like if we think differently as Christians, that we're not under the law anymore. Again, I know this is a little different, but I'll tie it in.
Sure.
But now who we are in Christ is we're free from the obligation of the law. Now we're free to live life for the glory of God. It's that thinking that puts us in a place where we're not stuck to the idea, the feeling that we have to obey the law, right? This is Galatians 5. We walk by the Spirit, we don't gratify the desires of the flesh. It's when you put yourself in a place where you are thinking correctly, healthy, if you will, that keeps you from having to deal with the bad stuff. So I think in terms of grief, it's like if you're struggling with how to think about it, you need to find a way to put your mind in a correct perspective. If you're a believer, put your mind on Jesus.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing that brings you out of it. Because there's this sense, I think, where we forget that God is also working in us to make us more like Him, to shape us, to like grow us.
Yeah.
Colossians 2 talks about how we are being built up in Him. So I love that idea. It's like this, like we're not even doing it. It's almost like I'll tell this story about my kids building Legos. It's like that. It's God's building you, whether you know it or not. He's putting these pieces in place. So like when your mindset is on those things, it doesn't mean you don't feel grief. What it means is that it's tempered, I think is the word you used earlier, which is good. So I think that's, in my mind, maybe there's other things I can think of, but like that's the first thing that I think is the best direction to go, is like shape how you think. Because even secular psychologists agree, seemingly, that how you think affects your emotions.
Sure.
Like when they do counseling for depression, the medicine only treats the emotion. The medicine doesn't treat the state of mind.
The underlying,
when you go to counseling for depression, what they're trying to do is make you think differently.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is what makes the depression start to go away, is when you start thinking differently.
Yeah.
Do you think that some of the struggle people have with, and again, grieve, as a Christian, grieve, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you're going to have these moments that kind of just like,
my dad still cries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, she was the love of his life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you just said, and I hadn't ever heard you say that before, that every now and then you still expect her to pop by.
Yeah.
Right. And so those things will still happen. But do you think that sometimes, the answer is yes, but let's talk about it. Like we as people put a higher value on the loved ones in our lives than we do Jesus.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think one of the biggest things that, more than likely subconsciously, but I think there are plenty of people that do it consciously. When a big loss like that happens, it feels like all the good is ripped out of the world and ripped out from underneath you. And therefore you don't know where to place your thoughts. You know where to place your actions. You feel like you're free floating. And so I think one of the biggest things for believers is, obviously we say it all the time on the podcast, is keep Christ as core, where we're training ourselves in the good times and the bad, but really in the quote unquote good times, what it looks like to think as a believer. So when it seems like the rug is pulled out from underneath us, when it seems like all the love and life or whatever is sucked out of the world, we know it's not true because we've already thinking properly.
Our foundation is Jesus.
And so so you'd mentioned your dad still cries. There's a song. So I lost my grandma in 2016. My grandma, my mom's, actually both grandparents, both grandmas, I lost in 2016. But the one that hit the most was on my mom's side, because I saw her every day for years. She picked me up from school every day. We hung out every day. When I was in college, we watched soap operas together every day. and
didn't y'all have like a regular card or domino night?
Oh yeah, we had game nights all the time. Man. Yeah, it was great. And there's a song. It's called Nana by the 1975, and they're not Christian whatsoever. Even the song, they mention that they're not Christians, but there's just some phrases that they use in the song. No matter what, I will cry. No matter what. It hits. There's a couple things he says about grandma as grandma. And I'm like, that's my grandma. Like, yeah, that's funny. And it's not tears from a place of selfishness, like how dare you, God, take that away from me, type thing. It's just remembering. It's remembering, like she used to take her freshly painted nails, or not freshly painted, but her perfect nails, and scratch my head while I sat underneath her. And so like I remember the amount of comfort and acceptance that I felt at her house. And I also, she was one of the few people that taught me that acceptance and love and grace doesn't necessarily mean that you don't speak up. Yeah. It doesn't mean tolerance necessarily. And so like what sucks is, like, I'm so thankful that the Lord, or in the midst of her dying, I was more susceptible to seeing how much she meant to my life. Yeah. I wish I would have acknowledged it beforehand, if that makes sense. Yeah. That doesn't change the reality of where we are now.
So there's something cool I think you acknowledge in that. It's that there is an aspect of grief sometimes that we need to lean into.
Mm-hmm, yeah. You learn from it. You can grow from it.
So it was your positive memories of your grandma that was bringing the grief, if you will. Yeah. So it also triggered this thought. Probably with the time left, we need to talk about this at least a little bit. I don't think grief is always tied to death.
Right. Oh, no.
There's an aspect of grief where, like, maybe you're in a marriage relationship with your spouse is cheating on you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's grief from that. So I think we've only hit one aspect of it. And this might be,
true.
You know what I mean? Like, there's not probably enough time for us to deal with all aspects of grief. Well, grief could be
the question specifically was death, but I think it's a good point. Yeah.
Because grief could be like, if you worked for an organization like House of Faith for a long time, and then your leaders found out were like these,
there was a lot of sin and sexual sin.
And these are the people who led you to Jesus, or these people who mentored you, and you feel, you know what I mean? Like, we have friends now, 456, and friends even outside of that, who I know feel grief over that work situation and that spiritual part of their life situation. It's not death. No. So there's other aspects of grief.
It almost feels like a death, right? Like there's a sense in which, like,
so I was going to say on that regards, I think to your point, Pierce, if Jesus is core for you, like if that's across the board, I forget how you just said it, but like, no matter the circumstances, the good or bad, that doesn't change. Like, what changes is Jesus still the core. And I think it applies in any aspect, in any circumstance. Like, if your goal in life is to know Jesus and to make him known. I hate that phrase, but like, that's old school me. Anyways, but if your heart is Jesus, it doesn't
still like that phrase.
It doesn't mean you don't feel grief. It doesn't mean you don't feel pain. It doesn't mean that circumstances don't get harder. It doesn't mean you don't feel joy or happiness or excitement and that times aren't good. It means that no matter which way life goes, good or bad, that there's some stability in your life, because your goal isn't changing. Your goal is unfazed. So there's an aspect, I think, of no matter what kind of grief you talk about, the answer is probably the same of how you move forward with that, and that is continuing to put your mind on Jesus, or maybe even like the idea in Hebrews to fix your eyes on Jesus, if you will, or Colossians, set your mind on the things above, not on the things of the earth. There's all this mental talk of how we think through the New Testament that I think can help us deal with grief of any kind.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's back to what I was saying in regards to Christ being the core, like, in those moments, people tend to allow the emotion of grief to give license for questioning things, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so like what I said earlier, like, well, why would God do this? There's a lot of people that experience loss, and so they begin to throw those questions out there. So just like what you're saying, that I love the language of there's stability in the midst of that, because just because emotion is thrown your way, that doesn't grant you license to question the nature of God or to question God's love for you. And so in those moments, there's stability of like, I'm resting in you, God, because right now my world feels like it's in shambles, but I know that it's not, because I'm in you. And so I'm going to lean into that understanding and not what's happening around me.
I think it actually shows the state. So it's not a license to question. If you question, it shows that you're not actually stable.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Like
it shows that Christ wasn't your foundation.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're shaken. Here's what I think people, go ahead.
Maybe use a different word than shaken, because people are going to describe grief as, man, this shook me. You know what I mean? Unstable
in life.
Yeah.
Your stability is moved. Like you.
From Christ.
Yeah. Or like, yeah. Yeah, you're right, because I think people define that differently.
I think we have to keep Christ in that. Otherwise, because people are going to say, man, I feel like the rug was pulled out from under me. They're going to say, I feel like my world's falling apart.
Yeah, I was just trying to use New Testament leaders.
Yeah,
like,
gotcha.
We will not be shaken.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. That I think is good. So let's bring that into the conversation.
Explain it that way. Yeah.
Okay.
Because I think there's a sense where people are so, like their mindset is, I just want to avoid grief.
Yeah.
And I think that's sometimes what hurts.
Yeah.
Is that you're trying really hard to do something that you can't do.
Yeah.
Instead of processing it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not even joking about this. Sometimes the best response to grief is to cry.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Like there's an aspect of like emotion where you have to let it out. And Ryan, you've talked before about how like that part of you is broken because of your childhood.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's not there.
Oh no, it's definitely there.
Like there's
I'm broken, but it's definitely there.
Right. And so that's what I mean is like so I've learned some stuff recently about my personality type, and I've been in this journey of the last few years of like trying to understand my tendencies better. I didn't know this, that my personality type, they feel big. Not big like as a person, but like they have big feelings. This is probably better way to say it. I don't know. That's how it was said, and I was like,
I feel big boned, man.
Big bone. They have big feelings.
Big boned in my heart.
That's right.
So
my
it's
heart's
like
big boned.
This is like I'm the same person that would be like in somebody's face that everybody else is scared of, like calling them out on stuff. And I'm the same person that might cry in a movie. You know what I'm saying? Like, which just seems like those are two contrary things, but it's personality tendency. And I think sometimes
you definitely cry more than I do.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not broken. And I think there's a sense where that this, just being completely honest, like the stability of my upbringing with my parents allows me the opportunity to deal with that stuff. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing in my head that's like, I can't feel this emotion right now.
Yeah.
There's no like sense of pushback.
Sure.
And I think that's where sometimes people like, they're so adverse to grief that they like, almost like push it aside,
right?
Versus like leaning into it,
sure.
Like lean into the grief
while holding Christ as the central foundation of everything you're doing.
I don't even think you premise it there. I think you start before that. If you deal with grief and have to go, I've got to keep Christ as core. I think there's a struggle before grief even happens with keeping Christ as core. What I'm saying is the stability in your life is pre-circumstances.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Your perspective of who you are in Jesus.
Ooh, say that again, because I like that sentence.
What's that?
The position of your life is pre-circumstances.
Yeah, or your stability in life. Yeah.
So whether it's a good circumstance or a bad circumstance, we're not swayed by either if it's
correct.
Jesus.
I'll be transparent for a moment and show like an area I feel like of instability in my life. Like, to be honest, like there's an area I think that is still a struggle for me in terms of like trusting God completely, and that's finances. And I think it's exemplified by how when things get rough, I try to fix it first before going to God. And it's also exemplified how when things are okay, I'm not thanking God for his provision. Not by tendency. It doesn't mean I don't ever. I'm just saying that's not
I get you. Yeah.
So that's just a really dumb, like kind of a dumb example. It's a small example, I should say, not a dumb one. But like, I think the stability in our life comes from our hope in Jesus.
Yep. Yes.
So that when something happens and grief comes, I'm not reminding myself in the midst of grief, keep my hope in Jesus. I am able to lean into the grief, feel all the emotions, deal with it emotionally, and it doesn't shake me, or it doesn't make my stability go away.
So this is a little bit, this is gospel-centered. Paul is writing in 2 Corinthians. He's talking about being entrusted with the gospel, and he's talking about the persecution they've faced as they have administer the gospel to people. And you've heard this. We have this treasure in jars of clay, the treasure being the gospel, the jars of clay being Paul and Barnabas and Silas and Timothy, who have been disseminating the gospel, to show that the power belongs to God and not to us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying about in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus can also be manifest in our bodies. We who live are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our mortal body. So death is at work in us, but life in you. Now, I think that a lot of people, when they face grief, would say this. Instead of saying, we are afflicted but not crushed, they would say, I'm afflicted and I'm crushed, right? Like it's that we're perplexed and I'm in despair. Instead of I'm not in despair. I feel persecuted and I'm struck down, instead of I'm persecuted but I'm not struck down, right? I feel persecuted but I'm not forsaken. I think that people say, man, I feel like, where's God? Piercy mentioned that. I go, where's God? Struck down but not destroyed. And I think that what's really interesting about this is the first half is just the normal response to the situation. Here's what's going on in my life. The second half shows whether or not your foundation is Jesus. And the reason that he can say, I'm struck down, but I'm not destroyed, it's not that he's not struck down. It's not that he's not perplexed. It's not that he's not beaten up. It's that his confidence is still resting in Christ and not the situation. Because I'm looping in what you said a minute ago about situational grief, that there are situations and not just the loss of a person, but it's my confidence isn't in the situation or circumstance. My confidence isn't in the person that I loved and cared about, whose life was taken way too soon. My confidence is in Jesus. But I'm still sad.
It still hurts.
So maybe that's the value system that you can see exemplified. So like when someone feels like they're persecuted and, what does he say after that?
Persecuted and forsaken. Struck down, destroyed.
Okay. So like there's a sense where like if something happens and I experience grief, whether it's death or some other situation, and I'm experiencing, to your point about Paul's text here, like both of those, I think it shows my value system is not in Jesus, it's in me. And so that might be the answer to some people's question. Like, why does this grief feel so heavy? It's probably because your value is in something other than Jesus. Like if even the other person, like if you're like codependent to some degree of the person and they die and your worth has been in that person, then all of a sudden it's going to feel like, it literally will feel like the world is crashing down around you because your value is not in Jesus. Your value system is not Jesus. Your value system is in the other person or something else. Philippians 3, Paul says, I consider all those things as a loss compared to the surpassing greatness of knowing Jesus. I think you'd asked this, one of y'all asked this a second ago, or maybe you said it about your family. Like I've thought about this too. It would be life-changing if my family died. Like life-changing. I would continue to do life and I would continue to do ministry. It might just be a little different. You know what I mean? Like
for sure.
There might be a sense in me.
I would cry a lot more.
There might be a sense in me where I find myself sad more often. I don't think that's wrong.
No.
That's what I'm saying is I think some people miss that. Like they're thinking, why are you sad still?
Be sad.
That's
okay
life.
To be sad.
It's when I'm sad and I forsake, if you will, for lack of a better word, sorry, Britton, the calling of Ephesians 4 to be who God has gifted me to be in the body of Christ. The ministry God is using me in. If I forsake that to go like be a janitor, that's a bad example because there's really good janitors. I'm saying like I'll give a good example. If I forsook that and I'm like, you know what, I'm going to go run a business because I don't want to feel sad anymore. That's when there's a problem. Is when it's for me as someone who knows where God has me in life and I veer away from that because I'm so sad. That means that my value system isn't in Jesus, it's in me. And I don't like the feeling, so I'm trying to find a way out. I don't feel like that's any different than people who medicate for the sake of grief.
I've now talking about it, it helps me kind of realize the stuff that I've gone through. So you'd asked me about grieving my dad and stuff like that. I think the majority of my grief beforehand was with my dad was actually more of the divorce and more of learning of his lifestyle and his turning his back on Christianity and stuff like that. But I now realize, just at this part of the conversation, that I think why the grief felt so much more heavy at that time, I wasn't a believer at that time. Like, I think what I was doing was realizing
at the time that your dad left your family, you were not a believer.
Yeah. Okay. So at the time my dad left my family, I think it was obvious that God's been working in my life for a long time, but I don't think that I placed faith in Jesus till I was 17, 18, something like that.
Yeah.
I'm one of those guys that doesn't know what that looked like. I know where I am now. But looking back at how I handled that grief, it was my life and my belief structure, and so much of it was defined by my dad and by the structure of my family and my home life. And when that was ripped out from underneath me, the way that I responded was in anger and in frustration, absolutely, but also in a sense, and sadness, but also of like, I need to pick up these pieces and figure out where I stand now. Like I was 14 whenever I learned all the details of it. And so I'm thinking, okay, I think looking back, that's why it felt so much heavier, was because I took all of that burden and made it about me, if that makes sense. And I tried to work myself through that, versus thinking in kind of the same light of a life event that happened that wasn't death. My grandma's Alzheimer's before she passed away. And the chaos of my home life, of my family life, of going over there and not knowing if she's trying to get my grandpa arrested or if she's going to know who I am, just the amount of instability in the household. I remember standing at her counter, just watching her scream at my grandpa and trying to figure out, like, what do we need to pin her down? Like, what is going on? And there was this point where I was like, God, I don't get this, and I hate this, and I see that this world is broken, but let me lean upon your understanding and see this your way. And just in that moment, I began to pray. And so, like, versus in that moment when I was 14, thinking I got to figure this out and piece everything back together and make it work. Versus when was that, mid-20s, saying, God, I don't get this. I can't make it work. I'm going to lean upon you in this because you're the only stability here. This is not stable. This won't work. And so it's interesting to see both were grieving situations, but one was in light of the gospel, resting upon Christ, and one was resting upon my own works, my own efforts. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah. So,
I have a feeling that's probably more common. The simplicity of what you just described is probably more common for people who struggle through grief. Is not, I feel like they're trying to attack the grief instead of trying to recognize what the source of their feelings are. You know what I mean? Again, we're saying grief is part of life. It's just emotion you deal with, but maybe it can be, we might be putting ourselves through unneeded grief if our mind's in the wrong place, if our minds and hearts are in the wrong place.
Yeah.
I think maybe as a parent, my biggest fear is that my kids will die.
Yeah.
Which is stupid. I'm saying it's stupid. Because my kids know Jesus.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that generically as a parent. I'm talking about me specifically.
Right.
Why do I feel better about my mom dying in that regards than my boys? The only reason would be because my mom was almost 60.
Right. She was older.
That's a dumb perspective.
Yeah.
If my hope was in Jesus.
It's an unbiblical perspective.
Yeah. If my hope was in Jesus and my kids' hope is in Jesus, I will miss them.
Oh, yeah.
But, like, I can't say this is bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, this is, I don't like it. But, like, they're with Jesus. So, like, while I think there's I'll say, I'm trying to get to this. There's maybe an unneeded pressure we put on ourselves as parents who are believers, who have kids that are believers, where we hang on to them so tightly that we're actually putting our value in our kids rather than in Jesus.
Yeah. So this whole conversation is making me grieve. It's interesting because I've been sitting here thinking just about my dad and two types of grief. So before my dad died, when my boys were really little, and every time I'd walk past their bedroom and they'd be in there playing or whatever, I'd leave to go preach somewhere or something. I'd look at them and I'd say, boys, you know what? I love you. And when they were really little, I'd go, hey, boys, you know what? And they'd go, what? And I'd be like, I love you. And as they got a little bit older, I'd say, hey, boys, you know what? And they're like, oh, we know, Dad.
We know, Dad.
You love us. And I remember one instance, particularly, I was standing in their doorway and I just said, listen, like, I'm going to keep telling you that. And I said, because some kids never have dads that tell them that. Yeah. And I'm sitting there, of course, thinking of me. Like and my dad's still alive at this point. And that was grief. That was real grief that I felt. And now that my dad is gone, I look at my boys there are so many things that I think of. And so I think of my dad actually more often probably than I realized. Asher just turned 14. His birthday is at the end of May. Mine's at the 1st of May. So in terms of our age and our school experience, we're about the same. We're just a couple of weeks apart. And so Asher got in 8th grade at the end of the year, he got an award it's called the Cougar Character Award. And they pick a boy and a girl out of 8th grade to
that's cool.
Or out of middle school to kind of show Cougar character. Right. And so I got selected for something similar when I was in 8th grade. And I remember, but we actually had an awards banquet. Our school was a lot bigger. We had an awards banquet. This was just kind of a deal.
Because you're from an oil town.
Yeah, this was just an assembly they did one morning. But I remember standing outside, and I remember being in line to go in. We're dressed. It's me, my mom, my dad. We're dressed kind of nice, and we're standing outside to go into this dinner and this awards banquet where I am receiving this award. And some woman walks by and addresses my dad by his first name, says, "Hey, Dan, how are you?" And keeps going. And my mom's like furious. And she's like, "You know who that is?" He's like, No. She goes, "You know who that is." And like, clearly there was this backstory. My dad had a lot of extramarital affairs. And so clearly this was one of these women that he had. And I remember breaking down in the line outside and crying and just saying like, "Can we just not tonight? Can I just go in and get an award?" And and I remember thinking about, here's my 14-year-old son. He's like, and I just think, man, I think there are two thoughts that run through my head. The home that my 14-year-old is growing up in is different than the home that I grew up in. And then I have a flash, like a moment of panic, like, but does he know? Does he know he's loved? Does he know he's cared for? Like, it just, because I kind of catch my breath and I didn't feel any of that. I legitimately don't feel like my dad cared about me. And so there's grief in that. And I've realized that, like, and we've talked about this, Micah, that my motivation for raising my boys can't be to do a better job than my dad did. Yeah. It has to be, I have to show my boys the love of Christ. Yep. And so even in this situation, the foundation has to be Jesus and not the circumstance, and not wanting to be a better person than my father was.
Which a lot of people would look at as like a noble cause.
Yeah, they would totally look at that. And so one of the things you said, I don't know if it was recorded or before we started recording this episode, but you said that the only people, speaking to Pierce and myself, the only people who think our jokes about our dads are funny are Pierce and myself. Because everybody else is like, "Man, that's, wow, okay, that's dark." But I read a book.
Or maybe, to be fair, the only people who would think that's funny are people in similar situations as you.
I read a book a year and a half ago called Deep Survival: Who Lives, Who Dies, and Why. And such a crazy book, like all based on true stories of tragic events and the people who died in those events and the people who survived to tell the stories of those events. And one of the things that it said, this guy's interviewing like fighter pilots, and this guy's interviewing soldiers, and this guy's interviewing like police officers, and this guy's interviewing all these different people, firemen, whatever. And he said that one of the things that he noticed was in common in all of them is that they all have a very dark sense of humor. And he said, laughter is involuntary. You can't fake genuine laughter. Like, it's why people laugh at awkward moments. It's why people like somebody says something in a sermon and you find it really funny. and then I know. And then I literally cannot look at the back of the room, because if I see you and Pierce, I'm going to lose it, you know? And you can't, it's just genuine, right? Yeah. And so he was saying that genuine laughter is a coping mechanism for ways that we deal with dark things in our life and trauma.
Interesting.
And so part of the reason that...
So like the dark humor is...
Yeah. So part of the reason that coping. Pierce and I probably joke the way we do about our dads is it's a way for us to laugh about something that otherwise was very tragic to us.
Yeah. Is it like a cover up for those emotions?
Because otherwise, and I can't speak for Pierce, but for me, because otherwise, if I think about the reality of it, it's just too crappy. Yeah. And I had way too many nightmares and way too many scary things in my childhood, and too many things that were too traumatic for me. And so if I'm going to have any chance of navigating that, now again, Christ coming in changes the ball game, but we're just talking about the psychology of your brain. Then I have to find a way to inject some light into it. And so people joke about these really tragic things as a way of kind of like coping. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so that's the other thing too about grief, is that, like, I don't think we all grieve the same way.
No.
And I think it would be naive to expect that we do.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm sure that I've offended some people with my dad's statements and stuff, but like, I was
thinking about laughter. Sorry. And in regards to what you're saying just now with grief, I don't know. I think we do come at from different perspectives, because I don't know if I could laugh if I didn't, after my dad's death. I was a Christian by the time my dad had died, to add clarity. If I hadn't grieved what I would deem as properly, like in the midst of walking with Jesus. Over his death. Yeah. And then going back and processing my previous grief as well.
Yeah,
like,
I gotcha.
That was what was so like heavy at the time, was just like when he died, it was kind of like this door opened. There was so much more freedom. It felt like it was weird because the freedom wasn't brought about necessarily by his death, but it seemed like that's when I accepted, like, I need to walk through this, because I've been holding on to so much that from before I was a believer to now, like, I need to let the Lord work through not just here and now, but also kind of previous stuff that I've gone through. And I think that if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't be able. I think I'd be more offended than I could laugh. Versus now, it's like, not that the stuff itself is flippant. It just it doesn't hold weight in my life, if that makes sense. So therefore, I can joke about it. And then socially, I like that people cringe whenever they hear it, because they haven't been through that. They don't know it.
You like to make it awkward for me.
Yeah. So there's part of me, and then there's parts that I feel bad. There was this one time, I might have shared this story on here before, but it was, we were hanging out up at the dorms at ASU with a bunch of students. It was me and Austin and a few of his residents up at the Plaza dorms in Angelo State. And I looked at my clock real quick, checked the time, and I noticed it was February 18th. And I went, "Oh, it's my dad's birthday." And just said it out loud, didn't think about it once. And this girl next to me goes, "Did you call him?" And I was like, "Oh no, I'm not even trying to make you feel bad, but it's about to happen." And I was like, "Oh no, he passed away a few years ago." And no joke, she actually started crying like in the group, and she's like, "I'm so sorry." And I was like, "I'm not, it's okay. Like, you didn't kill him. It's okay. Yeah. You don't have to worry about it."
Those are hard.
It's rough, right?
I said it one time. I was with a bunch of people I didn't know at an event. We were at one of those nitrogen ice cream places.
Those are so cool.
And I said something like, "Oh, my mom would love this." Oh. And I guess they didn't hear me say, they just like associated my mom with like this.
Yeah.
And they said something like, "Oh, why don't you take her sometime?" And I was like,
that'd be hard to do.
I'm about to make you feel real bad for what you said.
And it got like, I said it, my mom died. It was only like a couple of years after she died. And it was like this weird, awkward silence for a while. I've never seen that person since. I still do events for that same place, and I've never seen that person since. So they're probably like, "Oh my gosh, that guy."
I was talking to somebody about it recently, and the person I was talking to has lost both their parents. A couple years ago, their mom had early onset Alzheimer's that took a long time, but she eventually passed away a couple years ago. And then her dad had committed suicide when she was a kid. From my understanding, I believe that's correct. And she said that to avoid those conversations, she graduated from nursing school recently as well. And they were like, "Oh, your parents must be so proud." And she goes, "They sure are. They really are. They really love that I'm here in this life." And then she just keeps going about her day. And her husband didn't know that she was just over here lying about people. And he's like, "What if you see those people again? They're just going to assume, like, what if they add you on Facebook or something and see that you have no parents?" She's like, "Well, we'll figure that out then. But right now, I don't want to make them feel bad."
That's funny.
It's ridiculous. I like this conversation. I think it's a conversation that seems very simple, but people don't realize how simple it is when they're in the circumstance.
This is a really good conversation to have.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm not sure.
I'm all bummed now.
I was going to say, sorry, man. I'm not sure if anybody really likes it.
Yeah, it's hard. But I think it shows too, like, if we medicate, kind of using the language that you had said earlier, whatever that looks like. In our world, there is literal prescribed medication that can change certain feelings and emotions and stuff. There's also alcohol. There's also, well, I guess not change emotions.
Yeah, I don't think it changes emotions.
It doesn't.
I think it dampens them and dumbs them
down.
You
can numb the pain, if that makes sense. You can numb the pain. So like you can numb the pain with actual prescribed medication. You can numb the pain with alcohol, with other drugs. You can numb the pain by being around a certain group of people or by doing a certain thing.
We should be honest. It's all drugs.
It's all drugs. Yeah. It's all with the goal of
it's altering the state of how you feel.
Absolutely. And I think that God didn't call us to ignore the emotion, but in the midst of that, we lean upon God in the midst of the emotion so that we can understand it well.
But I would argue that sometimes those medicine, and the phrase that I tend to use is, will clear the fog. It helps you get to a place where you can.
Yeah, I'm just trying to acknowledge.
The goal still is to get through, is to process, not get through it, but process.
I'm just trying to acknowledge that they're all drugs. I just get sick of people saying like, well, this one's okay and this one's not.
Right.
In terms, let's just be honest. Those are lines drawn gone by what a government deems okay and not okay within a society.
Yeah.
So like, I mean, you can look back. I know this is a little rabbit trail we're not going to go on, but like, mushroom type drugs were used for centuries in a lot of cultures for this kind of thing, but we have deemed those illegal. You know what I'm saying? So like my point is, I'm not disagreeing with you, but my point is like some people like justify it. Well, I'm going to take these drugs because my doctor prescribed it. But I'm not going to, like I'm anti-alcohol.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like alcohol does the same thing.
Yeah. They're elevating
What we don't want is for people's, we don't want their dependence to be on those things to manage the grief.
Because I think what a lot of people do is they justify it. Well, the doctor said this is okay, and so they just lean into that rather than saying like this is
into Christ.
This is a temporary thing to help me clear the fog. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And instead of saying like,
and then surround yourself with people who love Jesus and
Yeah. And I don't think it means, I think this is what people miss. It doesn't mean the grief goes away.
Yeah.
I do think it can be tempered. The bad feeling of grief can be tempered, but I don't think it goes away. If the goal is to make grief go away.
Yeah. It's more of like, how can I, you used the word manage a second ago, and I think that is a good word. And simply like, how can I, what does life look like now that this grief has happened?
Yeah.
It'll look like every now and then where a random thought pops in your head, or I'm at a birthday party, or I'm at a graduation, or whatever it is, or you smell in memory, man. It's insane. So like you smell that one scent that brings it back. How do I now live with this when this wasn't an issue before they had passed away, before they had left, before this traumatizing event had happened? What people want to do is they want to ignore it and get back to what they viewed as stability prior to that event versus stability in Christ, if that makes sense. So how can I live with this now? What does life look like to live with this now? It's still in Christ, but maybe it's altered a little bit because I have feelings I didn't have before.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So yeah, it's a hard conversation, but a necessary conversation because this is a part of life. Loss
Everybody's
going
to grieve. Yeah.
So I am, we apologize for digging up old wombs. Wombs.
Wow.
That got way too dark real quick. Wounds. We apologize for ripping off any Band-Aids or anything like that. But I think it's an important conversation. And well,
if someone had a Band-Aid on a gaping wound, it needed to be ripped off and sewn up.
Exactly. Leading a simpler view, like in grieve with Christ. In the midst of the stability that you have in Christ.
I think the conversation is dealing with grief, right?
Yeah.
So you deal with grief by setting your mind and your heart on Jesus.
Yeah. That's good. I like that. Sweet. You know what else I like? Stephen. We're at The Garden Audio. Go check him out on social media, on Instagram at The Garden Audio. While you're over there, give us a follow at Simpler Pod. Let us know what you want to talk about. Let us know. We as heart-wrenching as some of your stories may be, we'd love to hear those stories and encourage you in the midst of that.
That might actually be helpful.
Yeah.
That would be really helpful, I think, if someone was willing to share their story of grief and maybe how putting Jesus as the focus was a help for them.
Absolutely.
I think stories, man, are such a good help for people in regards to this kind of conversation.
Yeah, it builds community. We share that in the midst of community.
Yeah, it reminds you you're not alone in this.
Exactly. Yeah. So we'd love to hear your stories. We'd love to hear, may it be something that's happened recently or something that happened a while back in life. How has God worked in the midst of it?
You know what? Let's do this. How about if you're willing to, video yourself telling the story, and we'll share it. We'll post some social media posts with it in regards to this, because I think that'd be really helpful.
Yeah. If you have a story you want to share,
you don't have to do that, but
not at all. Then DM at SimplerPod on Instagram, and we'll share an email address for you guys to share that file with, or you send a link to a Dropbox link or whatever. We would love to share it, and we would love to show to the Simpler community that if anybody's going through similar things, they're not alone. And in the midst of that, we have one common foundation, and that is Christ. It is the love of God shown through Him. That is hope showed through Him, and joy showed through Him. So as always, keep Christ as core. What could be simpler than that? Catch y'all next week. Bye.
Nada could be simpler.
Nothing.